Everybody, a little scenario. Imagine you're back in high school. Guys, you're with your best friends. Girls, you're with your best friends. It's prom night. Girls, you guys probably spent all day getting ready for this, guys. Maybe 5-10 minutes. Basically, with your best bud, with your best girlfriend, you guys are getting ready. You got your dates. Excited because it's your first prom of your high school career, so you can't wait. You get to the door, and police looks at you. He looks at your friend and says, "You can come in, but your friend can't." Your friend hasn't drank any alcohol, isn't in any possession of narcotics, any drugs. Your friend can't come in because they're not white. Well, that's what's happening right now. In 2013, we're actually having segregated proms. So easily, my major claim is segregated proms in the year 2013 caused a little bit of harm. Secondary claim is that segregation in the South harms the outlook of the whole country. This is happening in the South, actually in Georgia, Wilcox County High School. They have segregated proms, a black prom and a white prom. Obviously, this can bring some unwritten laws of segregation into the mix. One example is a biracial student who was a mix of black and white actually went to one of their proms and the police escorted him out, kind of how like I just explained in my scenario earlier. Another example is a biracial couple was actually looked down upon in a school. They were ridiculed and ostracized, basically outcasted for being together. Another student who was actually interviewed in the article said if a student attempted to cross the segregation divide, they would probably have the police come out and escort them off the premises. If a person dated outside the race, they would most likely be ridiculed and outcasted completely from everybody. To be honest, I was very shocked when I read this, and it kind of hit me home because I'm actually multiracial, and for the most part, my whole life I've dated outside of my race. And it brings me to my next point in this claim, that the enforcement of the segregation is prominent in the community. The biggest thing that shocked me completely in this whole entire thing was it actually wasn't the school who supports the proms. Can anybody in here guess who's actually the one promoting the proms?
The parents.
Parents. Parents are the ones who are actually promoting these proms. They actually build their own little organizations and fundraise their own money to make separate white proms from black proms. The parents are basically the ones who are reasonable for this, which is basically another point, which is my secondary claim, is the segregation at the high school is not tolerated by everybody. Luckily, there were 4 students, 2 white girls and 2 black girls, who were all friends, and they tried to make an integrated prom at the high school. One of the students out of the 4 said, "We are all friends, that's just kind of not right, that we can't go to the prom together." And I totally agree, but I also agree that it's not just a little not right, it's just completely not right. Another one quoted said, "I put up posters for the integrated prom, and we've had people rip them down and basically call us all kinds of names for even trying to have an integrated prom." Majority of the responses to the integrated prom idea is that we need to stick with the tradition. This is a traditional thing. We don't need to change and stuff like that. But why? No one can answer my question of why. That's what the girl said. The student turned to their governor for basically for help, like help us to have an integrated prom. The governor, he said, "These students are a front for the Democratic Party and are engaged in a silly publicity stunt." And after the governor said that, a liberal activist group asked the governor to support the kids. He declined them and rebuked the group and said, "A leftist front group for the state of and called them a leftist front group for the state of the Democratic Party. We're not going to lend a hand to this silly publicity stunt." So unfortunately, I mean, it's not, you can't say the students didn't try, it's just they couldn't get any help. This kind of leads me to my last point, to that quote that they said, how many people say this is a tradition. We don't want to interrupt the tradition of segregated proms. So my last point is segregation brings us back to the harmful history we overcame. So many of us know the type of history that we overcame with Plessy versus Ferguson, which was a Supreme Court decision ruling out that it was okay to have separate but equal clauses, basically segregation everywhere. Segregated schools, you had segregated theaters, restaurants, people weren't even allowed to drink in the same water fountains, segregated restrooms. That's something we overcame. You can see that with the Brown versus Board education, where we were finally allowed to have a same school system. People were allowed to have access to the same history books and all that. And another thing we overcame was the Ku Klux Klan, which is, I mean, they're not as prominent as today, but I will be one to say that 3 years ago, I got a cross burned on his lawn, so don't tell me that they're not completely still here. But at the end of the day, this is something that is wrong and needs to be stopped. Segregation in America basically hints to the harmful past that we overcame, like I just spoke about, and it just needs to be stopped.
All right, Andre, this is one of those weird kinds of subjects that comes up, and it's interesting, and you could definitely see how it's controversial within the context. Whether or not it's generalizable is the problem, I think. We need a little bit more information about, is this a common practice? That it's happening at this one place may simply describe the people who live in that particular place. That there's a harm that occurs because of this is a broader generalization. That, you know, if there's a harm that occurs in that particular place, then you need more examples of it. And the only examples that you have are they tore down the posters for the other prom, and they, you know, belittled a biracial couple, which, you know, are not good things, but that they're a result of the fact that they have segregated proms, I think is kind of a big inference that you're making here. If this is a traditional practice, for instance, in just this town, then we've got an isolated kind of weird case that we're looking at. If this is a practice that's done in multiple locations there, then it seems like it is a remnant of the old segregation policies and something that we might be a little bit more concerned about. Even if we stick to the one issue, though, of the one particular place, it really comes down to you know, the question of whether or not some harm occurs because of it. That it's happening, there's no dispute about that. I don't think there's much dispute about what's going on and the things that you described concerning what's happening there. So the question is, so why is it a bad thing? What negative consequence is going to result from it? You kind of at the end say that we ought to, you know, it's wrong, that's a value claim, and it should be stopped, that's a policy claim. What's the reason that it's wrong? Because it perpetuates these kinds of attitudes. If you could show, for instance, that there was more antipathy toward people, especially in this location, because of racial issues, I think that might be helpful. But I didn't hear any examples of racial incidents, segregation in the schools, fighting between racial groups. The only thing I got is a biracial couple got made fun of, and you know that's a bad example. But again, I'm not sure that that's a result of the prom thing or just, I don't know. I mean, kids are assholes, and I'm sorry to say it that way. You know, don't most of you remember being in middle school? Weren't you just about the worst human beings in the world when you're in middle school? Kids just say mean things to each other, you know. And attributing it to this, I think, is a little bit of an inferential leap. And this has nothing to do with your argument. I just had this weird thought that when you made this comment, you said you're multiracial yourself and you date outside of your ethnicity. I'm going, how can you date outside your ethnicity if you're multiracial? Doesn't that mean everybody that you date is kind of in your racial category?
Only because most people assume I'm just black.
Oh.
So,
all right. Yeah, well, I'm just thinking of categorical syllogisms, you know? So if it's outside of this, you know, if this is your category and somebody's outside of that category, that's fine. But if they're multiracial, How can they be outside of the category? That's an all-encompassing category. All right, thank you.